Okay, I accidentally closed the camera. This is Chapter 7, Eric Liddell, Part 2. And he just met the Mackenzies from Canada who had 2 daughters, Florence and Margaret. I'm on page 81. After 6 wonderful weeks in Puerto with his family, Eric boarded the train again for the final leg of his journey to Chichen. He needed to prepare for his classes in case any of the students decided to return to school. The rest of his family, except his father, stayed on a little longer in Puerto. James Liddell traveled back to Chichen with his son to keep him company. Eric's first glance at the city where he had been born was through the window of the train. The window of the train. Chichen was alive with activity. Everyone seemed to be on the move. Bicycles, rickshaws, electric streetcars, pedestrians, and motor cars all jostled for space on the narrow paved roads. At the station Chichen, James Liddell hired 2 rickshaws. The drivers quickly stowed their passengers' suitcases on the back of the rickshaws and helped Eric and his father get seated. On their way back to the house, James Liddell had the drivers detour past the docks. Although Chichen was 30 miles up the Haiho River from the Yellow Sea, it was a sprawling, bustling port that serviced Peking. 100 miles farther inland, the docks fascinated Eric. They seemed to go on for miles, and everything imaginable was being unloaded from the barges that had come up the river. Surrounding the docks were hovels where the workers lived. Eric had seen overcrowded housing conditions in London and Edinburgh, but nothing like this. It was hard to describe the dwellings as houses. They were ramshackle shacks packed so close together, it was hard for people to move between them. As the rickshaw drivers trotted off, they passed through a police checkpoint, and Eric's father yelled to Eric that they had entered the French concession. This meant that French policemen patrolled the streets in French, not Chinese. Law had to be obeyed there. As they entered the concession, the slums instantly gave way to beautiful white mansions with swimming pools and tennis courts nestled along stately, tree-lined streets. For some reason, which no one had remembered by 1925, the homes used to be missionaries of the London Missionary Society, were all located in French concession. At James Liddell's instructions, the rickshaw driver stopped outside number 6 London Mission Street. Eric whistled as he climbed down from the rickshaw. "This is some house you have here, Father," he commented as he looked up at the 4-story mansion. We lived in a much smaller one until the London Missionary Society found out you were going to be living with us. Then they insisted we move into this monstrosity, said his father in his thick Scottish accent. "Still, with the amount of entertainment your mother does, it will be filled with people in no time." Eric smiled. He knew what his father meant. His mother was always inviting people over for a meal or to stay for a few days. "Aye, the house will be well used for this, certain. That's for certain," he replied, helping his father with their suitcases. The house was as impressive inside as it was outside. On the ground floor were the kitchen and the dining room and his father's study. The living areas were on the 2nd floor, and all the bedrooms and bathrooms were located on the 3rd floor. There were 2 empty bedrooms for Eric to choose from, but instead he kept climbing the stairs. The whole top floor was attic rooms, each with a sloped ceiling. All the attic rooms were used for storage. Eric strolled over to the attic window and overlooked the tennis court in the backyard. "This will do me fine," he said, looking round at the boxes that would have to be moved to another room. It didn't take Eric long to get the boxes moved and set up his belongings in the new room. Most of his suitcases were filled with books about religion and science. Eric was eager to see the Anglo-Chinese college. First thing the following morning, he made his way to the school. He stood outside the gates, staring at the huge gray stone building. He had been told that the school was called the Eton of China, after the famous private school in England. Oh, Eton of China. I think that's where, like, all the princes go, like Prince Harry and Prince William went. Pretty sure of it. Okay. So Eric could see why it looked just like an English school, but it was right in the center of a Chinese city. Eric swung the iron gate open and walked up to the cobblestone path, to the wide stone stairs flanked on either side of potted plants. He climbed the stairs and rang the doorbell. The doorbell was quickly opened by a Chinese woman who spoke perfect English. Eric introduced himself to her and asked whether any of the other staff were around. The Chinese woman told him to wait. Moments later, the school principal came to the door. "Dr. Levington Hart, come in," he said, in booming voice, thrusting out his hand to shake Eric's. "Eric Liddell, sir. Pleased to meet you." Eric responded as the two men shook hands. "How about a tour of the place?" asked Dr. Hart. "I expect you want to see what you've signed up for?" He laughed as he patted Eric on the back and motioned him outside again. The first place Dr. Hart took Eric was to the sports field. On the way there, he explained why he had started the school 23 years before. "When I came to China," he said, "all the missionaries were concentrating on reaching the very poorest people with the gospel message. Of course, that's wonderful, but no one seems to have thought of the rich people, the politicians, lawyers, doctors, the university professors. No one was sharing the gospel message with them. I began to think it was these people, the rich and influential, who were going to lead China into the future. I began to wonder what would happen if some of these future leaders were Christians. So I set up the school for the sons of the rich and influential Chinese people. Many of the boys who've been through the school have become Christians, and they have gone on to universities here and overseas, and then to important positions all over China." Eric nodded. "Yes," he said. "I remember several of them coming to talk to us when I was at the Eltham College in London." "Then you know the quality of young men we are turning out here, and sports are a big part of it," said Dr. Hart with a flourish. As they turned the corner at the back of the buildings and reached the sports field. "In fact," he went on, "we were the first school in North China to begin a sports and physical education program. You should have been here the first few years when we were trying to get this all off the ground. Look back, it's rather funny, but at the time, it was very difficult." "Why was that?" asked Eric, interested in anything to do with sports. "Well, the Chinese don't have much idea about group sports," Dr. Hart explained. "So they had no idea whatsoever about sportsmanship. If one team knew it did not have a chance of winning against the other team, it would refuse to play. If there were a few drops of rain, the boys would run for cover as if they were about to melt. Or if one player got hurt accidentally, his whole team would take it personally and walk off the field. The referees had a terrible job trying to get either side to obey the rules, and to top it all off, the boys would not wear sports gear." "What did they wear?" asked Eric. "Just what they wore everywhere else, their blue robes. The robes came down to the ground, and the boys were forever tripping over them." "Do they still dress like that?" Eric inquired. "Unfortunately, they do," replied Dr. Hart. "We still have a long way to go when it comes to sports." Eric nodded. Dr. Levington Hart reminded him very much of the old principal at the Eltham College. For both of them, how a boy played sports had a lot to do with how he would play the game of life. Dr. Hart then showed Eric the classroom he would be teaching in. There, Eric got some good news and some bad news. The good news was that he would be able to teach all of his classes in English, even though all the students would be Chinese. The bad news was that he would also be teaching several English language classes, as well as chemistry. English was Eric's least favorite subject, and the thought of teaching Chinese students English, grammar, and Shakespeare plays did not thrill him at all. However, he reminded himself he shouldn't worry too much about it. After all, it wasn't even certain whether he would have any students to teach when the new school year started. The strike was still going strong. Eric would just have to wait and see how things worked out.